All right, good evening, everybody. This is the Public Works Committee. All trustees are present and accounted for. Has this meeting been publicly noticed?
It has.
Fantastic. Tonight we have two agenda items, both dealing with Capitol Drive pedestrian safety. And we also have Director Butchlick here to walk us through these initiatives. Would you like to get going?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So, excuse me. First item on your agenda relates to potential roadway modifications, specifically a discussed curb extension or bump out on the northeast corner of the intersection of Capitol Drive and Morris Boulevard. At a recent meeting, the committee directed staff to evaluate that possibility. So reporting back that we did have communications with Milwaukee County Transit System, and they had no objections. And in fact, we're pleased to hear that this was under consideration. Also did identify a possibility that bump out, if it were designed and constructed as a GI feature, could be funded with the village's MMSD Green Solutions money. Possibility, there's a bit of a deeper dive that we need to do related to the storm sewer infrastructure in the area, but it is a possibility. So the exact item before you this evening is to make a recommendation to the village board, or consider a recommendation to the village board to formally make the request to the Wisconsin Department of Transportation for review of the potential curb extension or bump out at that location. The WSDOT does have a decent list of requirements that must be included in that submittal. And so we do have a preliminary estimate from the village engineer, and that looks like it's going to be in the neighborhood of $15,000 to complete all the necessary evaluations and drawings for that exercise. Some of the work that we did under the previous speed study can be pulled into that deliverable. So there was some cost savings there. And it is possible I can get that down some just by doing a bit of a deeper dive into that and determining perhaps different ways to approach or consolidate that. But the ballpark for your purposes tonight would be a $15,000 cost expenditure.
And that's just for evaluation and drawings, correct?
It's a submission of documentation and drawings to WSDOT to make that so that they can do their review.
Okay.
That'd be the village's formal request, would be that submission.
Thank you, Lan. Is that,
Well, the other item that we discussed at a previous meeting was the potential for some overhead pedestrian alert signage in the, adjacent to the high school grounds. As I recall, that was a staff suggestion. It was not part of the original committee, or excuse me, the original taper request. This committee, my recollection is that was a lukewarm reception, but it asked us to look into it. And I think this probably doesn't come as any surprise to anyone, but the current grant landscape is not positive for securing funding for that type of signage. So it would be entirely a village cost. And so at this particular point in time, staff is not recommending that we move forward.
okay. And ballpark cost, you off the top of your head, 100?
That's
like that.
not out of the realm of possibility.
100,000, I should say. I meant. Fantastic. Thank you so much. Trustees, do you have any questions or comments on this initiative?
I like the idea of having a bump out there. It's a really, really wide intersection, and we get a lot of reports from people that live in the neighborhood that it's really problematic for kids crossing the street, especially. I've seen people doing the Milwaukee slide right at that spot, so could help cut down on that. So I think it'd be a good step. I'd still, just because it's so wide, it's 2 travel lanes each way, parking lane on each side, plus a turn lane. I don't know how much it's going to help. So I would still hope that we could do something like a raised crosswalk or something, something more, more infrastructure to help traffic slow down, make it safer, but I'm gonna be, in favor of putting this bump out.
Thank you.
I'm in the same boat as trustee McGovern. This is, from my perspective, this is an easy step one, but shouldn't be the final step. I again, whether it's the U-turns at that intersection or folks driving and passing on the right hand. Clearly more needs to be done there. But
Yep. I'd be in agreement, but I do like the initiative. I like we're taking baby steps to, we're taking full on steps, I think, at this point to try to get, this intersection under control. And I think there's been a lot of creative ideas that have been floated here in the past, and really look forward to sort of exploring that in the near future. But I think as far as what we can do right now, this is a really sort of positive step forward. Anybody from the public, would you like to speak on this for an initiative?
Sure, thank you. Gary Bronk, 1827 East Kenmore Street. So I was one of the 3 people who submitted that original TAPR request. I support this. As I recall, we didn't ask for a bump out there. We asked for bump outs where there were marked crosswalks and there were no there was no lighting. But I think that's a good place to have a bump out. I'm happy to hear your comments, commissioners, trustees, that you see this as a step and not as the final solution. I think that long-term, and I know that there's lots of barriers to doing this because of the state and for other reasons, we should be thinking about a narrower street, 1 lane each way, with more bump outs, and more efforts to have sort of the signage that we need to make sure that people realize that there's pedestrians. I've said this before here, I 3 times a week cross that street to go to the swimming pool. And I can't tell you how many times people honk at me because they're pissed off that I dare to think that I should have a pedestrian, that the pedestrians should have the right to cross that street. It's dangerous. And sometimes people actually gun their cars to try to get to me. And I've seen this happen with students also. And so I think it's a very dangerous street. I'm glad we're on this road. I think there's a lot more to do, but I think it's a long-term prospect. So, thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Sorry, Trustee Stokes-Brown.
I just wanted to clarify this $15,000 that potentially this would cost. It would look at the northeast corner of Morris, the northeast quadrant of north of Morris and Capitol, but would it also look at the Bartlett and Capitol? Is there any economy of scale having them both included? Are they both included?
They are not both included in that cost estimate
And so why not?
because I didn't ask for both.
I mean, if that's something that is also a big issue.
I'm sorry. It was the Public Works Committee's direction at the last meeting that we focus on Morris and Capitol. And if that were received favorably, then perhaps a similar scenario could be applied to Bartlett.
But then would we be paying the $15,000? I'm just looking for some savings here. And we know we want more infrastructure to slow this traffic down. Wouldn't we want to just go for both, for both?
that wasn't a direction that the committee gave the DPW. It was more of an incremental, let's take a look at Morris first, since it seemed to be, I don't think it seems to be, since it is the larger of the 2 problems. I don't know that there'd be any, they would still need drawings and everything should we do 2. So I don't know if there's any savings to be had
I think it would be minimal.
by doing 2 at the same time. But that was the direction that we gave as committee.
It seemed like it would be an easy way to take 2 baby steps.
Thank you.
Oh,
Uh,
I did have one more thing.
yep.
Are we under the impression that nothing going on at the county level can be used here for Safer Streets for All planning? Is there anything that can be used there? Just this week, the county okayed a plan to combat reckless driving, and it mentioned Lake Drive and Capitol Drive as areas of, we made the list of bad streets, right?
Those
Lake-
25 streets. that's
Lake
what-
Drive and Capitol Drive made the list of bad streets. And so could we get the county to pay for half of this?
No, I don't believe that's how that process works. It's simply a plan identifying areas for further review, further evaluation by the home municipalities.
I would think that we are ahead of the county when it comes to the actual implementation of the safety measure. I read it the same way. The first step in by outlining those 25 streets throughout the night.
Yeah, I believe this is the highest impact thing we can do at this time, outside of, a lot of different sort of higher level reconstruction. I think this is a really great step. So, and I love the idea of using or looking into the MMSD grant and creating that as a GI sort of feature. I think that could be really, really fantastic. Just no pile of rocks, because those rocks would then just be thrown into traffic, which might be a good thing, might be a deterrent. GI with rocks.
No comment.
Yeah. Okay.
Louder.
Nope, I'm good. We're good here. I don't think anybody's opposed to that, but we're good. Okay, anybody else from the public like to speak? Got nobody online. Anybody else? Okay. So do we have a recommended motion here to move forward? Does anybody like to make the motion?
Okay, I move to recommend that the village board direct the village engineer to prepare the necessary submittal for the Wisconsin Department of Transportation's consideration of a curb extension at the northeast corner of the intersection of East Capitol Drive and North Morris.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
And that wraps up that agenda item. Next, we have a 2025 Capitol Drive Pedestrian Improvements Initiative, consider pavement marking policy elements. In quotations or in parentheses, meeting number 5.
So you'll recall, we've been talking for some time about pavement markings, and that's in response to a very specific request that was part of the original TAPER submission. It was staff's recommendation that we kind of take a half a step back and review pavement markings more comprehensively, how they're used, how frequently they're maintained, what their purpose is, what material we use, et cetera. It was our recommendation that request be considered, in a larger context of how we're going to maintain pavement markings going forward, not just on Capitol Drive, but on all of our arterials, so that we are doing this, comprehensively and applying the same standards and conditions and thoughts to similar roadways, that one isn't looked at differently than another if the conditions are similar. As a part of that process, we also talked about, the increased marking that we're doing on all of our new infrastructure projects and the budgetary impact that is going to have as those projects age and require those markings to be maintained. Because that obviously is a consideration on anything we do. So you'll recall that staff requested that you ask us to develop a pavement marking policy. And so tonight, what I'd like to do is walk through some of the primary elements or components of that policy. Like, we have a couple buckets of things, different things that need to be considered, and each of those buckets have some choices. And I'd like you to provide some direction to staff as to which choice, A or B, you'd prefer. And then at your next meeting, I will bring back to you a written pavement marking policy that you can look at, decide you like it, decide you don't like it, ask for modifications, toss the whole thing, however you want to do that. And then that would then be, if you're happy with it, we'll eventually take it to the village board for their consideration and approval. And then that policy would guide how DPW maintains pavement markings in the future. You can choose to include Capitol Drive in that, or you can say that's an entirely different and separate condition, and we're going to pull it out and consider it separately. But I would like to look at this more comprehensively before we make that decision.
Fantastic.
So the packet included a memo, which, is just the stuff we've already talked about. There is a series of, I guess, it's tables, spreadsheet, and it outlining those policy decision components. So as you'll recall, we currently have two types of markings that exist in the village. One is paint, which we have traditionally remarked annually. That is done out of the DPW operating budget. The second type that is a more recent use is epoxy. The only street with epoxy markings, two streets that we have remarked, are Wilson Drive. That was constructed in 2018. We remarked it in 2023. That was done out of the DPW operating budget. In 2022, we remarked the crosswalks on Capitol Drive. They had previously been a thermoplastic tape material. That tape was ground off and it was replaced with an epoxy marking. As I mentioned, it was finished in the fall of 2022. The industry standard says epoxy is supposed to have a 3 to 5 year life with some variable factors, right? We already had a request to remark those crosswalks when they were less than 1 year old. So, right,
Yep.
just one of these things that we need to kind of come to some decision about a standard or remarking so that we can educate and make sure that everyone has the same expectations. All right, so we have the two types of markings. The first series of tables, that's material type. So if we look at existing paint markings, as I mentioned, all of the paint markings in the village, we remark on an annual basis. In 2024, the cost to remark all of those paint markings in paint was just over $24,000. So once it's paint, you can only mark it in paint. Can't mark over it with epoxy.
Okay.
So that seems pretty straightforward, right? We got paint, we remark in
Yep.
paint, no decision. The second set of decisions would be the existing epoxy markings. Right now, those are that will require remark are currently exist on Wilson, and then on Capitol, it's the crosswalks and the stop bars. We actually do have epoxy markings on South Oakland Avenue, but which we did during the mill and overlay, I believe in 2022. It's going to be my recommendation at this point that we don't schedule a remark on those. South Oakland is actually scheduled for reconstruction, I believe, in 2030, and I think we can probably stretch it till then.
Yeah.
Okay, so that we're really just talking about Wilson and then Capitol crosswalks and stop bars for now. So the actual cost of, the existing cost of all the the estimated cost of all the existing type markings. So all of the existing epoxy markings, Wilson and Capitol, to remark those in epoxy would be approximately $166,000. For our purposes here, and to make the math a little simpler, I'm going to assume a 4-year life on those, right? We're going to hit that sweet spot between 3 and 5. The estimated average annual impact to the operating budget is just over $41,000, just for those markings, nothing else. Now, obviously, we wouldn't be doing them all. We wouldn't do a third. We would do them all at one time. But this is just to kind of break it into, it's just so you know.
You would essentially levy every year.
That would be one
One
approach, right? So to remark those in paint, the estimated cost is about $88,000